Can you see me over the computer? No? Okay, good. I'm the only non-scientist who's going to be speaking today, so that's the good news or the bad news, I'm not sure. But certainly I've learned a lot from being with a wonderful, prominent scientists who are from around the world that the Heartland brought today. The Heartland Institute sought my consultation as an attorney who has worked in international human trafficking cases and in the field of child exploitation for 30 years, most recently with Oprah Winfrey in South Africa. I am here today because I am deeply troubled by the statement issued by the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, today's Pontifical Conference. Here's the statement. There is an intrinsic connection between respect for the environment, especially the poor, victims of human trafficking, and modern slavery. When I saw that statement, I was extremely troubled because this declaration of an intrinsic connection, a nexus between climate change and human trafficking, is on its face preposterous, deceptive, and infinitely damaging to the plight of victims of a real global crisis, the human trafficking victims, and a false one, climate change. St. John Paul the Great described what human trafficking really was about, and the cause was the sexual exploitation of women and children as a violation of human dignity. And that is the consideration that all of us must have with respect to human trafficking. And to link human trafficking as connected to climate change, in my opinion, is to bootstrap a real tragedy, ongoing crisis with a false one. And when people start doing that, it is because they have something to hide and they want to be able to obscure a false crisis with a real one. Based on my extensive experience with human trafficking victims, human trafficking thrives in both developed countries and undeveloped countries. Its victims and perpetrators span the economic spectrum. The crime is growing for a multitude of reasons: open borders, the ease of jet travel, instantaneous internet connection, to make that criminal connection, the criminal enterprise, and yes, through abortion, as its heinous and predictable mutation, sex selection abortion, continues to thrive in the East. The peddler-in-chief, who is now one of the keynoters over down the street at the Vatican, Sachs, states that we are bursting at the seams. These the predictions, thank you, to promote abortion and other child prevention measures. And who is the expert on climate change that the Vatican is turning to? Sachs, who spends his career sounding the alarm that the world is overpopulated and fertility rates must be lowered. We are bursting at the seams, he says. The focus of Sachs' overpopulation mantra is the continent of Africa. He argues that if only poor African countries would just lower their fertility rate, the world and Africa would thrive economically. But we've heard this before. We've heard it in the early 1970s with Paul Ehrlich, his false apocalyptic vision. This is his quote: "The battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death, and nothing can prevent the increase in the world death rate." Well, this fear-mongering is nothing new. Sachs and other climate alarmists are standing on the shoulders of Paul Ehrlich, the architect of the sky is falling deception perpetrated in this 1968 book. Ehrlich mastered the overpopulation canard with his infamous thesis, "The battle to feed all of humanity is over." And in furtherance of his imagined crisis, Ehrlich supported all kinds of draconian measures to address his concocted calamity, including putting birth control in the water supply, forced abortions, coercive sterilization, and forcibly punishing countries who balk at implementing radical population control measures. His doomsday prophecy was a fraud. Nevertheless, as a consequence of Ehrlich's population deceit, the UN began to immediately impose worldwide reproductive measures and pressure to reduce population. The big lie worked, and the UN used fear as an opportunity to introduce abortion into the world order. Jeffrey Sachs continues this phony drumbeat of overpopulation and conveniently adds some new tactics of climate change and human trafficking to justify and bolster the urgency. As we saw very clearly in the beginning, that the goal of the Papal Conference is to link climate change to human trafficking. Today, same tactics, same players, new alarm bells. The scare strategy of overpopulation, debunked by reality. Catastrophic global warming, debunked by science, morphs into climate change, debunked by science, morphs into sustainable development. Undeterred, the UN asserts its power to impose its elitist goals on the world under the rubric of shared sustainable development goals. That's why it's so very troubling that a papal conference entitled Dignify Humanity, the Vatican is consulting with the Secretary General of the UN and Jeffrey Sachs to recommend sustainable development measures which we all know use abortion, contraception, and sterilization to reduce alleged climate change. The Catechism of the Catholic Church addresses these issues very clearly. This is the moral teaching of the Church, which is in direct contravention of the measures that are being promoted by the UN and Dr. Jeffrey Sachs and many of the people that are experts consulting with the Vatican. The foundation of Catholic social teaching. This is John Paul II, St. John Paul II. First and foremost is that human life is sacred, and the dignity of the human person is the foundation of a moral vision of society. From the very moment of his existence, this is the sacred tenet of the Catholic Church. All the Catholic Church points to is the inalienable rights of the person, which must be respected by civil society and political authority. That includes the UN. So in the Catechism, they're talking very directly to organizations like the UN. And here's Jeffrey Sachs. Here are the words of the man who is sitting over in the Vatican, consulting with the Papal Academy of Social Sciences. The legality of abortion also plays an evident role, as well as the data, that those countries whose legalized abortion tend to have lower observed fertility rates, those where abortion are illegal. And that's the point, folks. Dr. Sachs and his agenda with the UN is to lower fertility rates using abortion. Here are some of Dr. Sachs' commandments for sustainable development. In direct contravention to the commandments from the Catholic Church. Reduce the poor's fertility rate by imposing UN climate change edicts. You'll notice the language is very subtle but very clear. Population dynamics are very important for sustainable development. We will be very different if the population reaches a certain number, 10.8 billion at the end of the century, or instead peaks by 2050 and declines to 6.8 billion. Again, this is the overpopulation canard. This is pushing this agenda to have forced sterilization, abortion, reproductive services in every village throughout Africa. And this is the expert from the UN advising our Pope. We have these precious tenets of the Vatican, that the Catholic Church is and must be the protector of innocent life. The drumbeat of Jeffrey Sachs, and here's his 7th commandment, which clearly states that they must guarantee access to sexual and reproductive services. Poor women need family planning services. That's the commandment that is being pushed by the UN and Jeffrey Sachs with respect to this climate change agenda and conference. There is an undeniably deep and moral and ethical conflict between the UN, Sachs, and the Vatican. By aligning with Sachs and the UN, the Vatican is risking great confusion to worldwide Catholics on moral issues, and as you will see later from our prominent scientists, on science issues. Here's Sachs on India. India is one, along with Africa, that he has his sights on. Again, reducing the size of families. But the church has some prominent Nobel Prize winner, as we all know, who is an expert on India. In fact, she probably served tens of millions more people and her sisters than Jeffrey Sachs ever even writes about. Blessed Mother Teresa knows the poor. And she says the greatest destroyer of peace is abortion. And that quote is one that should be guiding the climate change conference and guiding the moral teachings of the Catholic Church. Finally, here's Sachs with his 3-child policy for Nigeria. I'm really scared about population explosion in Nigeria. It's not healthy. Nigeria should work towards a maximum of 3 children per family. Here is one man, Jeffrey Sachs, with the enormous power and influence of the United Nations, lecturing Nigerian people to limit the size of their families to 3 children. The hubris is breathtaking. In conclusion, I find it incomprehensible that the Vatican would be misled into thinking that the United States and its Millennium and Sustainable Development czar share common solutions for the world's population. The Catholic Church welcomes children as a gift from God. The UN Secretary General and Jeffrey Sachs want to limit children. We seek the truth today and turn to the child, both born and unborn, rich and poor, whether African, Asian, European, or from the Americas. For the child is the guardian of the truth. Thank you.